So here's the thing. Turns out PowerPoint is not the problem. Oh, it's easy to say PowerPoint sucks. It's easy to blame PowerPoint, but guess what? 99% of the PowerPoint slides and presentations that people give that suck have nothing to do with PowerPoint. They have to do with the people who created them. If you were to interview, and some people have, all sorts of executives and ask them, would preparing and presenting information more effectively impact your earning capability, your income? 85% of them would say yes. And then if you ask them another question, which is, well, how long on average do you spend preparing a presentation? The average is 2 hours. If you know that presenting well, if you know that speaking to an audience effectively would drive your income up, why would you only spend 2 hours? It just doesn't make sense. When I go to prepare an hour-long presentation, it can take up to 20 hours to prepare, right? Because it's my job to do the work. It's my job to prepare correctly. And if I do that work, the notion of finding and working through the right stories, creating the right slides, using the right images, if I do that work, then that hour-long presentation and that 45-minute presentation are powerful. And when I design my slides, I don't read them. That's not the point, right? Because reading your slide says your slide is your crutch, right? Reading your slide says, okay, this is what I'm going to use to get me through my presentation. And that's not the case. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are just scared and stressed about speaking and speaking in front of people. And especially if I say, I want you to speak without notes. But I want you to know this, and I've tested this over 100 times. I could look at you right now and say, I bet you could, and I can guarantee this, but I bet you could speak for the next 5 minutes without any notes and no presentation preparation. None. If I said, stand up right now and speak for 5 minutes straight with no prep and no notes, do you think you could do it? And most people say, no, I couldn't do it. I'd be too stressed. I have nothing to say. I have to work through the stuff, and I need notes. I cannot speak without notes. And then I'll ask them this. Tell me what your last vacation was in the last 5 years and what you loved about it most. Pick your favorite vacation and what you loved about it most and tell me about it. And you know what? No one has ever said, oh, I can't do that. Everybody can talk about their favorite vacation and what they love most. And they can talk for 5 minutes. They can talk for 30 minutes, right? Without any notes at all. You know why? It's because those experiences are inside them. They've lived them. They've completely absorbed them. And if you've prepared your presentation correctly, it has lived in you long enough that you can present it without notes. But if it hasn't, if you're just going to throw out a whole bunch of data and a bunch of facts, it's not going to work, and you're definitely not going to be able to do it without notes, right? So how do I help you get started with presenting? How do I help you get better at presenting? And how do I help you get better in terms of your slide decks, right? Well, what I want to do is I want to give you just a couple tips, right? Just a couple of tips that if you've seen me speak, now you get a sense of, okay, that's why. That's why his slides look the way they are. The single biggest problem people have is they put too much information on their slides, right? It's like you're writing a white paper. You put all sorts of text, right? And that's horrible, right? Easy way, and I picked this up from Guy Kawasaki, but the easy way to know what the smallest font on your slide should be is to take the oldest person in the room, take their age and divide it by half. So if you have an 18-year-old in the room, then your 9-point font makes sense. But shy of that, you should never do it, right? 30, 40, 60-point fonts are fantastic, right? People at the very back of the room can read it. And if you can't read it from the back of the room, then why do you even have a slide? On top of which, when you're presenting, you're the one speaking. You're the one talking. If you put a whole bunch of words out on the slide, guess what happens? People start reading the slide. And if they're reading the slide, they're not listening to you. So by putting all those words up there, you've actually distracted them. Instead, your slide should be a visual aid. It should be a helper. It should be a prop. Think of your slides as a prop so that when I want you to feel something, when I want to get to the point and give a 1-2 punch, I throw a visual image up to help me. Over half your brain, over 50% of your brain is wired to consume visuals, right? It's set up to process visuals. So don't throw a whole bunch of words on the screen. Throw up an image. Throw up a good image, not a cheesy image, all right? So we talk about the biggest mistake is that people put too much on a slide. Let me give you a simple rule, right? For every slide you create, have one and only 1 point, okay? For every slide you create, have one and only 1 point. Now, think about this. How many points do you want to present in a main message, right? Because I can tell you, people are not going to remember, right? Here's another thing to note. 90% of the people who leave your presentation will forget your content within a week. In fact, over half of them will forget it within an hour. So don't put 16 points together. Put 2 or 3, right? Your overall presentation ought to have 1, 2, maybe 3 main points, 1 takeaway or 2 or 3 max of the things that they want to remember when they leave. And that means every slide that you present should have 1 and only 1 point on it. Do not use a default template where you're able to put 3 points and then you keep thinking, I just got to keep putting on more and more information, right? Now, second mistake, right, is that most people's slides are text-based, right? And that's the default of the way PowerPoint gives it to you. You have the title and then you have bullets. And so just go ahead and fill it up with text. And that's not helpful, right? Like I said, most of your brain is prepped for visuals, right? The frontal, the front part of your brain, right, is designed to process language. And if you get people to process at that point, you have also stopped all emotion. You've limited the emotion. You've limited their ability to act, to make decisions, because none of that happens up here in the front. It's all happening in the back. So if you want to get people to a call to action to move, you need an image. You need something that evokes emotion, right? Hit the very back of the brain, the middle of the brain that says, okay, I'm going to do something with this. Evoking that emotion is easiest through powerful visuals, right? And like I said, don't get cheesy ones, right? Don't, I spend a decent amount of time picking the images for my presentations. That is what takes a majority of my time. Once I've sketched out what I want to talk about, finding the right images and finding, if you want to talk about partnership, you don't need 2 hands shaking. That's a ridiculous form of partnership, right? Find a partnership that highlights exactly what you're trying to say. So, if what you want to do is highlight a partnership that most people don't imagine is very fruitful or beneficial, but it turns out it is, right? Go find an image of a whale with, little guys sitting on top of the whale, and you're like, look at this symbiotic relationship that you would never expect is useful, but now let me use it as a way to tell you the story that I want to tell you, okay? There's no reason you need to use really cruddy images, okay? Third point, your screen is too filled up. There's too much stuff going on in here. This is a mess, right? Use white space. Design your slides. Make sure that you're, leaving enough breathing room so that when you do put your text on there, it has the space and it has the size to stand out, right? I talked to you about rule of thirds. You could search rule of thirds anywhere on the internet and you'll find this notion of a grid, right? Where you slice your screen up into thirds horizontally and vertically. And so it gives you these vertices, and move things off of center, right? Move them off to the side or to the top. As you do that, you make it visually interesting. You also use a lot of white space in your design. Let it breathe, and all of a sudden, people will go, "Okay, this looks great." Okay. The fourth thing, right, is invest in making it. You want a slide deck that is, when I work with slides, I want them to be their own work of art, right? I'm not looking to create a whole set of handouts for people in my slides. I may create a physical handout, a Word document, but my slides, those slides are set up so that basically I'm just interacting with you and creating the right emotional tone back and forth as I'm working through material. So I want to use really quality fonts. I want to use really quality images. I want to use a color palette that is consistent across the board, right? I don't want to end up with all these wild colors and all these fonts and all that. You need to design your slides, right? And that takes time. Again, I talk about a work of art. Simply let it stand out, right? A lot of the conferences where I present, in a single room, there may be 5, 6, 8 presenters, and if you're number 6 out of 8 and you've been going after all these people, I can tell you that people will feel refreshed, they will feel engaged the moment they realize your slides are not going to look like anyone else's, right? That your slides are designed and they're meant to be easy to read, clean, fresh, emotionally engaging because of the imagery, right? So that's, I'd say by all means, design your slides, and be consistent. Right. Another mistake people make is that they're not consistent. So if you're gonna do a color scheme, pick a 4-color palette and use that. If you're gonna pick a set of fonts, pick 2 fonts that you've figured out work well together and just use those 2. Do not change your fonts all over the place. If you're gonna pick a style of imagery, right, whether it's black and white or action or vintage old or children or whatever you're gonna use, right, be consistent. And it will have this, it will create an ability for people to really receive and connect with you because they're not getting distracted by your aberrations, right? One of the things that happens is if you're designing a set of slides and you go from beautiful full bleed images to suddenly, suddenly having clip art in the middle of it, people are they're gonna stop. They're gonna be distracted, and the moment they stop, they're gonna start thinking about other things. Right, and that's you don't want that. So you want to do that. And then the last mistake, right, is not enough prep. And we talked about it at the beginning, but seriously, you need to spend time. You need to practice. There's no way that you're going to be able to just stand up in front of people and start talking. There's 2 kinds of prep. There's prep that happens before you present, and by all means, invest in that. There's also prep by putting yourself in situations where you can talk, right? Put yourself into a meetup where there's 20 people, because that's going to be a lot easier than presenting somewhere else at a conference where it's 200 people. And go do a lot of 200s before you go to do 1,000, because all of those are different. When I go speak on a stage that has 1,000 people on it, what tends to happen is the stage is big enough, the gap between the audience and me is big enough, and the lights are bright enough that I no longer have the interaction, the interplay between the audience and me. I can't even see them because I got light shining in my eyes. And when that happens, right, for the first time, it's a scary thing because you realize I've been vibing off the people right there, but I can't do that anymore, right? So prepare isn't just get your PowerPoint deck right, get your stories right. Preparing is putting yourself in situations where you keep developing better and better skills. Now, of course, people who've come to my presentations, people who've listened to me speak, know that one of the first things I do is I start with a story, right? And I just want to leave you with this tip. When I start with a story, and typically it's not a bragging, boasting story. Typically it's a failure story. What I'm trying to do is highlight that I'm not the superhero in this narrative, in this interaction. I'm not the superhero. I'm not the guy who's the expert, the perfect one. I'm not the one who's like, you need to listen to me because I'm great. Instead, maybe I'm the fallen guide, right? Maybe I'm the guy who's gone through enough that now I can turn back around and say, just don't make these mistakes. But to do that, I have to tell a story that highlights that I've been where they've been. Because if I can highlight to an audience that I've been where they've been, then they can feel like they connect to me. And if they can feel like they connect to me, then they'll listen. And if they'll listen, then I can go into my main point. So when I start with a story, it's on purpose. On top of which, we're designed, we're shaped, we're crafted and created to actually understand and engage story, right? We're not designed. There's nobody who wakes up in the morning and says, just spit out all the facts, right? But you can't help yourself, right? In fact, if you've ever been in a restaurant and the people next to you are telling a story and you're sitting there with someone who's really boring, what happens? You start hearing that story, you start listening, right? And maybe even turn your head a bit because you're like, that story's more interesting than sitting here doing this. So I start with a story, but I start with that story because I want to connect. I start with a story because I want to highlight that I've been where they've been. I may be just a few steps further, but I'm not perfect. I want to start with a story because I know it will engage people and get them to a place of saying, wow, I need to pay attention right away, right? Because he's not going to do the first 3 slides about this is who I am, this is my experience. That's a horrible way to start a talk, by the way, right? People have said, define your bona fides, highlight, your expertise and why someone should listen to you. That's definitely not the way to commit a dynamic so that people say, yeah, I want to listen to you. For the most part, people think you're a conceited jerk, right? So, and trust me, I know this from personal experience. I've been there, I've made those mistakes. But I start with a story to say, I'm just like you. I'm maybe one step ahead of you, but I'm just like you. I've gone through these mistakes. And as I highlight some of these mistakes, I also want to highlight that you and I have had some similar experiences so we can connect. And what I'm answering is the question why. Why should I listen at all? Right? There's 20 other things they could be doing. And I want to start right off the bat with why. The other thing is when I start with a story, right? At the end of the day, I know that it will grab their attention more effectively than if I start with anything else. And so I'll start without any preamble. I'll just start with, he was my first hire. And immediately people are like, whoa, wait, oh, we just got started, right? Or, she came to dinner she was the kind of friend that you'd have at dinner, at your home, not at a restaurant. And they're like, oh, we started already, right? Because people know what a story sounds like. And they immediately pay attention. They can't help it. So those are some of the tips I give you in terms of getting started with presentations, getting started speaking. And I'd say get out there. Find a meetup, join it up, attend. Maybe there's a local Toastmasters. Get plugged into that. But get to a place where you can speak and speak more regularly. Right? At the end of the day, you will get better if you're doing it more often. Take care.